What do you do with a Super Famicom that has a gaping hole in the bottom? Well, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna replace it with this beautiful clear shell from Retro Game Restore. Hi, I'm Scruffy Lookin RGB, and today we'll be refurbishing this Holey Super Famicom I found at the flea market years ago with a brand spanking new shell. In today's video, I'll go over my process for refurbishing this Super Famicom, from replacing the caps to replacing the entire shell. Afterwards, I'll show you the results and give you the pros and cons as well as my thoughts on this shell from Retro Game Restore. These are the tools you're going to need for this mod. But without further ado, let's get scruffy looking. First, let's retro bright this controller panel since it's heavily yellowed, to see if we can get it closer to its original color. So we just need a little hydrogen peroxide, some UV light, and that good father time. While that is getting baked, let's take a look at how this Super Famicom is working at the moment. As you can see, it's running Sailor Moon just fine. And since the caps are exactly 30 years old, I think they need to replace it. What do you think, R2? The current board I have in here is 1992 SNS CPU GPM01. To find out what caps you'll need, you can go to Console 5 and check out their very useful list of caps for about any old console you can imagine, and even order the set that you need directly from them. But since I live super close to Akihabara, I just looked at my Famicom, took note of all the capacitors' voltage and resistance, and stopped into my favorite electronic parts store, Sengoku Denki, and picked some up. Here's a list of the capacitors you'll need if you have the same board revision as I do. I found out that the top number here is the capacitance measured in microfarads. That means 33 microfarad. And the number in the middle is the voltage. While it says 25A here, it actually means 25 volt. And the bottom number is a lot number, but we don't need to worry about that today. Okay, so let's prep this board for its operation. It's best to use some needle nose pliers to loosen the legs of these old caps until they fall off, but I just used my finger here. After removing all the caps, let's do a little board cleanup. Luckily, there was no sign of leakage, so our cleanup was minimal. Then we'll just get rid of the old solder and the remaining legs left over from the old surface mount cap. The through leg caps are much easier to replace in my opinion. Snip, heat, and pull. Just like that. Replacing the new cap is even easier. Just make sure the polarity matches and slide it through, bend the legs a little, and solder them in. 2 snips and you're done. Hopefully your surface mount caps are much less crooked than mine. Let's get this in and test the console. The moment of truth. Voila! Okay, don't get excited, I'm working on it. Okay, our innards are working. It's almost time to put our board in this beautiful shell. Now we need to put the heatsink back on before we do that. We don't want this freshly recapped system overheating, so let's go ahead and do that. The thing to remember is to be careful of the regulators so you don't break it off. It should be attached last with the screw. Also remember, the screws go through the bottom of the board and not through the top. You want to make sure the regulator is flush to the heatsink. Now that the sink is in, we can get this board into its new home. Add the power switch and insert the controller ports, taking care not to break the ribbon cable. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. The ejector lever is easy enough to install. Just orient the spring lever and rod like so, and she slips right in. Make sure the motherboard is seated correctly before you start to screw it down. Mine was a very tight fit. I highly suggest you replace all the old screws from Nintendo. I had a lot of trouble with tightening these screws down. A couple of screws stripped on me as I was fastening them down, and one even snapped off, leaving the screws stuck inside the plastic shell. To set yourself up for a successful shell swap, get new screws and use a driver with a good, hefty grip on it. The shell was just too strong for this 30-year-old screw, but luckily, we don't need no cart lock mechanism. I'm just gonna leave it off. Let's see how our controller port came out of its retro bright bag. Let's take one more look at her before and after. Slide it in easy back into the front piece. Looking good. Now we just need to slap the power, eject, and reset buttons. When putting in the cart door, Pay close attention to the spring. If you put it in the wrong way, the door will stay slightly open. If you put it in the right way, it'll stay shut when it's supposed to. Go easy on the bezel when putting it in. You don't want the tabs to snap off. But this bezel is far less fussy than the original brittle piece that's on the Super Famicom. It has good give to it, but it also doesn't feel cheap or brittle. Still, go slow, take your time, put the front in first, then the sides, and work your way to the back. How does it look? I have to say it's gorgeous. Wouldn't you say so, R2? It feels really solid. I love the clarity of it. Seeing the inside is really cool. Since I have both top bezels with me, let's put the universal style bezel in too. This is the universal bezel. I highly suggest this if you have a lot of North American games, because you can use both US and Japanese cards, which is really awesome feature on this top bezel. Well worth it in my opinion. Though being picky, I noticed the door flap doesn't reach all the way to the right and left side of the slot. There's a very small gap in either side of the door, which was apparently necessary so that the pegs on either side of the door flap are not too short. If so, they would easily break off. Per the designer from RGR, it is a small price to pay for having the functionality of using US and Japanese cards, in my opinion. What do you think, R2? I think so too. It looks really sweet. What do you guys think at home? Which top do you prefer? It's a tough choice, but I'll have to go with the original. But like I said, if you have North American games, Universal is the way to go. Plus, they give you this cool, clear cart door, which you don't get if you have the Super Famicom version. You're stuck with the opaque one. I really think this thing needs some LEDs inside. What do you guys think? Should I add some LEDs to this bad boy? Yeah, that's much better. Alright, so let's go over some of the pros and cons, and then I'll give you my thoughts. Pro number 1. It is incredibly strong. This thing is so solid. It's more solid than the original shell, and I think it might be a little bit heavier. This thing is just great quality. Customer service with RGR and this shell are fantastic. I had an issue with my top bezel. One of the clips got damaged during shipping. I contacted RGR, they got back to me like within minutes and sent me out a brand new bezel, and on top of that they sent me the universal bezel, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. Thank you so much for replacing that so quickly. Really great customer service. Thank you, RGR. One of the cons is you're going to need more screws. In the pack they give you 6 brand new screws for the outer shell, but in my opinion you could really just use a whole new set of screws. Also, the last con would be the price. This shell is not cheap. Let me just give you my thoughts right here. So this thing is built incredibly strong, just like good old R2 over here. This thing is beautiful. I mean, come on, look at it. It's clear. Who doesn't like a clear shell? It looks amazing. This shell is not cheap. Getting a quality shell like this is not going to be cheap. I mean, just from personal experience, I mean, I do some molding and casting here and there, but to get this kind of quality, it's not easy to do this, and it's not cheap. So definitely looks aesthetically great. I mean, it's clear, it's strong. I will definitely be grabbing another shell from them very soon. Question of the day. If you could choose a console to swap the shell to clear, what console would it be? Mine would have to be the original white and red Famicom. What's yours? If you want more mods, don't forget to leave me a like. Let me know how I can improve this one. In the meantime, check out my list of mods at the end screen, or if you prefer retro game hunts, I have a playlist of those waiting for you too. Thank you all for hanging out with me today. I hope you're staying safe, but above all, stay scruffy looking.
Who's scruffy looking?